Today, we have a long-awaited guest that's going to be joining us on the PWD Allies podcast. We're going to be talking about crime and safety, and we're also going to be talking about the Cowichan land title decision ramifications. So join us next on PWD Allies podcast, and you'll find out who the guest is. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to PWD Allies podcast. My name is Brent Frain. I'm the host. Today, joining me is Neil Matheson, my editor-producer from Surrey, British Columbia. Hello, Neil.
Hello.
And I'm broadcasting from the capital region of British Columbia, Victoria, BC, not too far from the BC Legislature, where a lot of decisions are made for the public and for the citizens of British Columbia. And also joining me is our long-awaited guest from Surrey, British Columbia, Elenore Sturko. Hello, Elenore. How are you?
Brent, hello. I'm excellent. And hi, Neil. Great to be on the show.
Yeah.
So welcome. Thanks for joining us. A long-awaited guest.
I pursued you for so long, Elenore.
Hey, look. You know what? Maybe good things to those who wait. I hope.
Yeah,
I hope that we have a lot of fun having our discussion today.
Good.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And for our viewers that are just tuning in today, or you're listening on your favorite podcast, Elenore and Neil and myself, we're going to be talking about crime and safety and the Cowichan land title decision ramifications in British Columbia. So first of all, let's dive into the crime and safety, Elenore. What the hell is going on in BC?
Well, I shouldn't laugh. We have actually quite a severe issue, especially when it comes to extortions in Surrey. We have over 100 cases of extortion, but only about 76 unique victims. So we know that people who are victims of extortion right now are being hit multiple times, sometimes involved with multiple shootings at their homes or places of business, which is, of course, extremely concerning for members of our community. We're up over 100% year to date in shootings. And then across the province, we are in the midst of a street disorder crisis with people. I mean, everywhere you look, you can see street disorder, lots of behaviors that are happening and criminal activity happening on the street, sky trains and other public places that really are, driving a lot of fear in community. We saw a survey that was done around Labor Day by the Business Improvement Areas BC that said 1 in 5 businesses considering closing if street disorder doesn't improve in BC. So lots to tackle, and hopefully lots of solutions on the way too.
Yeah. Well, on the last podcast, Brent, I think it was on the last one, I talked about being in my scooter going up to Superstore here in Newton, and I had to go around a guy that was bent over, like touching his toes. And I found out that that's a very common pose if you're on fentanyl, if you're going through a fentanyl, what do you want to call it, a buzz or whatever. They have that static pose where they're bent over and they're completely unresponsive. And I've had to drive around so many of that, and it's just so disheartening, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with an unprecedented drug crisis in the province. Certainly, people are now seeing more and more people on the street with, what you could suspect would be evidence of drug use and severe issues. And one of the things that's also unfortunate is that because of the epidemic of drug use and addiction that we have in BC, we also have an increased number of people living on the street and in community with brain injuries from multiple overdoses. And, we don't have enough services, for us to provide people with the care that they need at this time. So it's one of the things I've been calling for, advocating for, obviously more care for people especially those who are vulnerable, people who have, through drug use or through injury or other means, they have brain injuries and they have lost the ability to really care for themselves. So one of the things, despite being a critic for the government, one of the things I'm happy to see is that the province is kind of moving in this direction. They hired Dr. Vigo, and he's putting in place plans to increase these kinds of services. And I really hope that they also move away from decriminalization of drugs and move to an expanded version of the Drug Court of Vancouver, drug treatment court, so that we can use our system to help compel people towards services and monitoring to help people get back on track and get some accountability.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of moving parts with that because I know that in the state of Oregon in the United States, they had an experiment with the decriminalization that process, and they stepped back from it. What is your view on how BC's handling it compared to what was going on down there? They said it wasn't working, and BC continue to kind of follow.
They still did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, they should have sought more information for what was happening in Oregon at the time, because even before we started going down decriminalization, which began 3 years ago in 2023, January 31st, they were already having problems in Oregon with decriminalization, and they saw a spike in street disorder. And there was also a study that recently came out this summer that studied crime as it related to what happened during decriminalization. Crime went up, violent crime went up. And, I think that we, even without seeing any data from the government, I think just using your spidey senses and what you see on the street every day, we can see that we also had an increase in those kinds of behaviors. And I should point out too, and you guys I think know this, that before we ever had the decrim pilot, we kind of had a de facto decriminalization because people weren't actually getting charged for simple possession anyway. And I was a police officer at the time, right up until I got elected as a politician. And, we were seeing people on the street or, talking to people on the street, or if they were involved in an investigation, we weren't charging them if they had personal use drugs anyhow. But one of the things that doing that and moving away from that form of accountability was that people then stopped going to drug treatment court as well. And so we took away any, kind of programming that really helped people be held accountable if they were involved in behaviors that were criminal or broke the social contract. And so what I suggest and what I'd like to see us do moving forward is similar to what Oregon did. They changed drug possession from a felony to what we call a summary conviction. So for us, instead of indictable, we'd go summary conviction, and we could offer people in a drug treatment court that they could have, maybe they would have a conditional sentence or something, so that they, at the end of their program, they wouldn't have a criminal record if they were able to complete, some programming. And I think that, this doesn't mean going after groups of people. I'm really big on not generalizing. This isn't about going after people who are addicted to drugs, right? This is about targeting behaviors that are harmful to everybody else. If you're on the SkyTrain and someone sparks up, crystal meth in a pipe beside you, that's dangerous for you. And not to mention if that person, their behavior changes and they were to become violent or, become agitated, that would also strike a lot of fear in people. So not seeing a guy on the street with a pipe in his hand and arresting him, but looking at those behaviors in public that are causing harm on the community and addressing those behaviors through programming that can actually help people be guided to those kind of services that can help.
That's just it for me too, because this government, Eby's government, is always talking about stigma, and I mean, of course, you don't want to over stigmatize people, but at the same time, I've always said, if a behavior is bad and negative and destructive and unhealthy, you want to stigmatize it a little bit, right? I mean, we do that with cigarettes and alcohol. Why not do it for drug use too? I mean, if it really is bad for your health, Yeah, well, and I agree with you. I would say that we don't want to necessarily stigmatize
people,
you don't want to
right?
stigmatize
If you're
people,
addicted,
but the
like
behavior.
I think I'm agreeing with you is
Yeah.
that like, look, if you have a health issue and you need to get help for an addiction, like we are all there for you. British Columbians are rooting for you 100%.
Right.
But like, yeah, I think that, we've seen for under David Eby the entire time, and even longer than that, because of de facto decrim, people, someone sent me a picture of someone in a Victoria area, Tim Hortons, snorting lines of some substance off of a table.
Oh,
I mean, this kind of behavior is contrary to the greater good for all of us. There's certain behaviors that we have to stigmatize, and we have to create a deterrent to it. Like if you go into the Tim Hortons after somebody's put some substance on the table, are you going to want to put your donut down? Or, you're with, I would argue that this is creating a very unsafe situation. And, we all have the right to live in a safe community, and we have to, not necessarily prioritize the rights of one group of individuals over others. We need to be very careful that we're balancing the public interest when we're creating policies. And sadly, under David Eby's watch, we have seen a situation where not only have people become sicker, or certainly not better from, the addictions crisis, but we've also seen these worsening safety outcomes and an elevation of fear that people fear. You said you were riding your scooter down the street and you see a person slumped over. I mean, you don't know what that person's behavior could be like.
Exactly.
They could wake up. When I was a cop and I would give somebody Narcan because they were overdosing, sometimes people wake up swinging, and and that's just the reality of what's happening on the street. And it's not to my, I'm not trying to drive fear, but these are things that people see every day. And we need to get a handle on it, and there are solutions, I believe.
Because I mean, like I mentioned on one of our podcasts recently, it's the same thing. Is like there was a gentleman that was bent over right near our bus stop, and it was bus shelter there, and there was some change on the ground, so he was bent over, and I thought the person was trying to reach down to grab the change, so I leaned down to go and grab the change, and the person looked at me and says, "I'm going to kill you." Wow,
Oh no!
It was obviously in a state of distress. And I mean, luckily there was a paramedic that was driving up the road, and I kind of like waved at him. I said, that person, needs some assistance, and they pulled over, and they basically gave the person, the help that they needed. But again, you just don't know this day and age is the person what state of mind that they're actually in. And I realized that at the time. I thought, okay, like I'm just going to keep walking, and it was better for my safety and well-being. And I guess that kind of strikes the point of our next conversation would be about, the safety, crime. I mean, it's escalated so much in so many communities around BC now. I mean, businesses getting ransacked, broken into, security guards, their safety is at risk too. Some of them got punched. Violation against, what they're trying to do is protect the business. And even the employees, I mean, they're scared about even going to work and to where they work, and when they don't show up, now they can't put food on the table, pay their rent, pay their mortgage, and it's a whole ripple effect throughout society. And I don't know what the solution would be to that. It's just so much street disorder.
I used to. Sorry, I was just going to break in. I used to work downtown where, like, on Hastings-ish area, the Disability Foundation was down there. They've actually moved. They're in a different location now. But so I was kind of always going through that area, and there was one wedding shop that was fairly close by, with a nice wedding dress and tuxes in the window and stuff like that, and and just not that long ago I was reading or an article, somebody was talking about like a wedding shop, and so I was kind of wondering if that was the one that I was walking past. But they were saying like nobody wants to come down and try on dresses if they know they're going to get mugged or assaulted on the way down.
Well, it's like down on the downtown Granville Strip in Vancouver. I mean, there's a lot of SROs right now, and I mean it's what is it, over 300% increase in problems that have been going on. And in basically even just like all of them, and they've been told to shut down. Now the government says, well, we're going to, keep shut down one of them, but the other two, well, yeah, it's just, I guess in the weeks and months to come.
Just in time for FIFA, boys. Hey,
right? Yeah.
Just in time for FIFA, but.
I'm sure that's a coincidence, though.
Oh yeah, definitely
yeah.
a coincidence, eh? But I just during the last campaign, actually in 2024, my chief of staff Teddy and we went down by the Lugat, which is the former Hojo Howard Johnson Hotel on Granville Street, and we actually met a guy outside there that lives in there. And got talking to him about his situation. And even the people that live inside, though, these places don't feel that it's the right situation.
Right.
From this person's point of view, he told us that he felt that he was treated worse than an animal and that he felt trapped.
Oh, wow.
And so, and at the time we met this fellow, he was in a wheelchair because he had been using drugs and he passed out in a puddle, and his feet were so wet and he laid in the water so long that he got like cellulitis in his feet. And they were very painful and swollen. He couldn't wear shoes, and it was just like very disturbing to see your fellow human being suffering that way. And but we chatted with him for a while, and he said that he feels that once you get into these situations in some of these government run places, you really are trapped. And it's a situation where you have very little chance of recovery because you're surrounded by drug use. And even as me and Teddy were by the bus stop talking to this gentleman, we had drug dealers on bikes circling around us.
Wow.
Yeah, we were like, we gotta scram. We've
wow.
been paid. So we left, and we actually headed up the street to Wild Thrift, it's called, and it was in the news. We went and visited there. And talked to their security guard and some of their staff because they had been in the news in 2024 summer because I think they had spent something like $300,000 or $400,000 just in broken windows and security costs. And you imagine some of these shops and stuff. We never used to have a security guard in a thrift store.
Exactly.
You didn't have to have security guards at the grocery store. There's grocery stores in different chains considering getting body-worn cameras for their staff, slash-proof vests.
Oh, wow.
And I had asked the minister, it was the former Solicitor General, Gary Begg, before Nina Krieger took over, and he was in budget estimates last year, and I was the critic for the Solicitor General, and I asked them too, like, at what point will government failures to keep people safe become too much of a cost burden for businesses? Because like profit margins are not super high. Can you imagine a thrift store? I can't imagine that the retail markup on thrifted jeans or whatever is very much. And you're talking about retail space on Granville Street.
Or like a Dollarama, how much money are they going to invest in a security for a Dollarama?
Exactly.
I mean, the amount of theft that's going on in those stores, the markup, they don't make a lot, and they're paying out more in I guess, recovery. Their insurance is going to cover it, sure, but it gets to a point where, from what I'm hearing in the community here, is I think some of the businesses saying that it gets to a point where their insurance companies won't even cover them after a while. Like they'll say, and then they have to go into business then. Or
what happens is that you make so many claims that the fees that you have to pay, your deductible becomes so high that it's not. It's untenable for the people with the insurance costs, right? And I think about, so I got 3 kids, they're teenagers now, but being in a situation where if you go into a store and someone walks in psychosis and is screaming or having some type of breakdown or in drug psychosis, the likelihood that you'll go back with your family into that store is
definitely
it's reduced. And that's not the fault of the business. And also, I would like to say that, in my opinion, in many cases, it's actually not the fault of the person in psychosis. It is the fault of our healthcare system and our housing system and the government, because these people need services that they're not getting. And if you can't, if you're living in a state where you're in and out of psychosis, you're, causing this much, trouble, you're not able to make a decision for yourself, you're wreaking havoc on the rest of the province. I mean, this is a failure of our system to provide adequate care for people. And it doesn't just mean, when we talk about crime, it's not always just about, building jails and locking people up. There is a root cause of a lot of these issues. And with street disorder, a lot of it is rooted in mental illness and addictions issues.
Yeah, exactly. And poverty too. Poverty.
For sure.
And that's another part of after we talk about our next topic of the Cowichan land title decision. What a mess that is.
Well, just before we transition, Brent, I just wanted to quickly touch on, like, Eleanor, you were the one that blew the doors off of the redistribution of all the fentanyl that was happening, like the crime element that was happening there. It was being resold, all the free fentanyl.
Oh yeah, the dilaudid, the hydrocodone.
Yeah, it was being resold again, and so you blew the doors off that one. And then also just recently, there was an announcement, or there was a media thing on Global. Remember the social development worker, the caseworker, that said there's all this fraud that's happening in the social development ministry, and your tweet, Eleanor, was the first tweet that I saw about that, and I think we have to kind of talk about that being sort of maybe more high level crime element, because of course I would say, like, the vast majority of people that are actually on the system don't have the wherewithal to cheat. I mean, even if we wanted to. So,
it really gives, like, we spoke about stigma when we talked about drugs.
Yeah.
But I think that people that receive social assistance face a stigma, especially like the rhetoric that's happening in the political world today. It's become in some ways a less kind world. And, if you look to the States, a lot of food benefits and other benefits have been clawed back in a way because there's this rhetoric about people taking advantage of the system. And here in British Columbia, I would say that the vast majority, you're right, Neil, the vast majority of people are not taking advantage of the system, but those who do, they put the stigma on those who are not. And they are perpetuating those myths that people who receive supplements because of disabilities or whatever are freeloading, or what I mean? And this is extremely harmful to people with disabilities in particular, because, for the most part, people are trying to provide for themselves. They're trying to be independent. They're trying to do their very best. We happen to live in the most expensive province in Canada, in one of the most expensive regions in North America. And, so I just feel like this whole scandal actually is harmful to the community, especially people with disabilities, because it raises the ire of people who already, have a lot of prejudice, especially against those who receive benefits. But I was appalled to see the way that they've changed some of the forms in government that actually pretty much facilitate cheating. They open the door to, they're not having any basic means testing, in some of these cases. So we have people, claiming that they need to have a supplement for things like a security deposit for an apartment, but they don't even have a landlord, or, they don't.
Right. They don't verify.
Tell their employees don't check.
They really need to start verifying landlords.
Yeah, exactly.
Verify it.
And they're not verifying the landlord. I mean, the money could be going to anywhere. And the part that really boils me, Eleanor, is during the budget of 2025, the finance minister said that they're going to sustain the status quo. In other words, and those are my words, but status quo of maintaining the services that people count on. But they gave $1.6 billion to that same ministry, MSDPR, over a 3-year period, because they said that caseloads have gone up. Well, now that kind of corresponds with the recent interview that came out by Global BC that from a whistleblower, a worker who has worked there for over 20 years. I'm glad that the whistleblower basically blew the top on it. But I mean, how many more whistleblowers are there? I'm sure there's a lot more. But again, yes, it gives a bad light on current PWD who rely on the service, that are just doing, like you mentioned, they're just doing the best they can. and they're not taking advantage of the system.
Well, you want people to be caught. The ones that are doing the damage. You want them to be caught because it is diverting money away. It is diverting money away from people that actually need it, right? So
yeah.
So you actually want to eliminate it.
Well, especially when there's a substantial amount. The MSDPR didn't really give the actual dollar amount, but there's a substantial dollar amount in crisis supplements. They said that current PWD can access, but the problem is you have to be. It's a state of emergency. You have to have exhausted all other revenue avenues. You can't have a pre-existing problem that maybe is a recurring problem month to month.
Yeah.
You're carrying a bag of groceries, Eleanor, and the bottom broke open.
Yeah, and that was all the food that you had. That could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or if you go up, but if you say your fridge has now frozen your stuff, no, that's already a pre-existing problem apparently. Like, are you kidding?
But honestly, I really think they should get rid of all of that, all of the hidden money, and just
throw the check.
Put it on the check.
One of the things actually that struck me in the interview with Global with Minister Malcolmson too is that she had actually said that they had already recovered $15 million.
Yeah.
Oh,
15 million
I know.
that went out and shouldn't have. That's okay. Well, I'm glad you got it back.
I
but
caught
that
that
shouldn't
too.
have even got out in the first place. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. And then one of the other things, guys, I think when you see things like fraud go up, okay, so when you see kind of financial crimes increasing, particularly where it's dealing with groups of vulnerable people, do we have a situation where the current supplements are not enough? I already know the answer is no, they're not enough, but people are looking for ways because they simply are desperate to get more money. And so, yes, it's fraud, and yes, we're seeing that people are cheating. Is it actually a symptom of, poverty is actually driving some of these fraudulent behaviors, which is also very sad. We don't want fraud and they should be doing more to prevent it. But I think that on the flip side, we do need to look at it perhaps as a symptom of the fact that we have this poverty crisis and people are doing even illegal behaviors to try to make ends meet.
Yeah, exactly. In my view is, you raise the rates up to a livable income and take away all the barriers of the crisis supplements, put them on the checks, and also then check up on, if you want a damage deposit, who is it going to, and have all these safety blocks put back in place so that it actually reduces down fraud. Have rent geared to income based on the individual in a household. That way people stay housed, and if they need the care that they need, based on their drug addictions, get them the care that they need. There's so many solutions that can be implemented in to reduce down poverty. I have great ideas. I asked them, I mentioned it to the minister, Eleanor, before. I said, tie the rents to the individual in a household and base it upon the individual. And you know what her response was? That's brilliant. I love that idea, Brent. And I said, well,
he needs to hire their people with disability.
I love it.
Podcast to solve all the problems.
Yeah, I love it, but we won't implement it. Yeah.
But we're going to send.
Sheila Malcolmson needs to tune in to the podcast more.
She does. But you know what? We should transition to the topic 2, Brent. The Cowichan land decision.
What a disaster that is.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Eleanor, I'll hand the mic over to you just on that topic.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of conversation going on right now. One of the things that happened was a decision that was actually as a result of one of Canada's longest trials that ever went on. And it was was filed in court, I believe, in 2015, Canada or Cowichan tribes versus Canada. And then came to a decision at the end of the summer this year where everybody knows by now, they've seen it in the news, that the decision is that land title was granted to the Cowichan tribes over an area in Richmond. And the judge included, even though it wasn't asked for, included private property, which is now, based on the way that the judge interpreted British Columbia's Land Titles Act, has basically said that these Indigenous title trumps private property title in British Columbia. And the reason that happened, and why the part of the judgment, like not the sole reason, I got to be clear that there's also other court precedents, and Indigenous title and other Indigenous rights are enshrined in the Constitution of 1982 and all. There's a lot of court precedents that happen that also goes into these decisions. Yeah. One of the parts of the decision was, it's called the Interpretation Act.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And the Interpretation Act is a piece of legislation that tells statutory decision makers, so judges, how to interpret all of our laws and regulations of our province.
Interesting.
And in 2021, when David Eby was the Attorney General, he introduced a change to the Interpretation Act, which is Section 8.1, and it tells judges that they have to sort of look at all of our provincial laws through to make sure that they are consistent with the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous People.
Yeah, like every law.
Yeah, every law. And so, and to be clear, even if we repealed this, guys, like Section 35 rights of the Constitution still exists. And we, this isn't about saying that we don't want to, have good relationships with Indigenous people, but Section 35 really balanced the public interest in a way that actually now with DRIPA, that's the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, kind of doesn't do as good of a job at balancing the greater public interest. And so this change to the Interpretation Act in 2021 was a result of DRIPA. And which is why now you hear everybody saying repeal DRIPA, which is DRIPA told the direction is going to be the following, that we would align all of BC's laws with the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous People, and that we would enter into joint and consent decision making in British Columbia, which changes our governance. And I don't think a lot of people in BC knew that.
Yeah.
And so after that was done, so if the goal was to align our laws, the mechanism that did that was this change to the Interpretation Act, which was cited as part of the decision in the Cowichan tribes. And you might have heard just a week ago, there was also an appeals court decision talking about the Mineral Tenure Act.
Yes, yeah.
And they also cited the Interpretation Act of British Columbia, saying that all laws and regulations must be, considered, I don't know the exact wording, sorry, I forget, but basically that we're looking at it all to make sure it's consistent with UNDRIP. And
oh boy,
this is an important point, because David Eby is like, oh my gosh, why would the court do this? But this is his bill.
Right?
He actually did this legislation.
Yeah.
And so I actually, before the end of the last session on November 19th, I introduced a private member bill, which was voted in on first reading. And it is to repeal Section 8.1 of the Interpretation Act to stop telling decision makers in court and other statutory decision makers to align our laws with UNDRIP.
Okay, so even if they repeal, they still have to change or accept the bill of the 8.1, the interpretation.
We got to take it off.
Yeah.
So because these decisions about our laws, so like notwithstanding that we have Section 35 rights, we must, this is our Constitution, we're abiding by that. Yeah. Notwithstanding that, this Interpretation Act is telling judges to align all of our laws with UNDRIP. So if you get rid of that part of the Interpretation Act, you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, it seemed kind of unnecessary because, like you said, things are already baked into the Constitution. So, like, it's almost like why bother to go the extra step, because it's already baked in. So it's
ideology, boys, ideology.
Yeah.
Different.
And I just wanted to say, that David Eby has messed this whole thing up so badly that the goodwill that, because, I think everybody honestly wants reconciliation. They want truth and reconciliation. But when you hide things behind closed doors and, democracy is hidden and it's not a public thing anymore, that goodwill and integrity of the whole thing is lost, not just on the government side, but also on the Indigenous side as well. Yeah. So he's basically blown both sides up like nuclear destruction, And it's just like
secrecy, secrecy, right? Yeah, and I mean, and what could go wrong if you keep things secret too long and nothing to see here? There's unintended consequences. I mean,
well, see, here's the thing, Brent. I don't think these are unintended consequences. These are absolutely the intended consequences of the NDP. The only unintended consequences is that everyone's mad about it, and they didn't expect maybe this to happen. And I honestly, you mentioned democracy too. I don't think that this is not democratic. I think that also it's not constitutional to give governing powers over to groups like governing groups, Indigenous governments that are not accountable to the electorate. So to make decisions about, projects or mines or the use of land, like that is parks or public land, is it a breach of Section 3 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to have these bodies making decisions that we don't get to have a say in, we don't have a vote for? And, I don't think that, Neil, you're right. I think that most British Columbians want to have reconciliation. And I think that, it's not a question of racism. I think this is a question of practicality and provincial sovereignty, and about what do we actually control as a province? How do we generate income? What is British Columbia? And I think that people didn't understand at the time that the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act was being introduced and debated at that time. I wasn't a politician, as a cop at that time, but I don't think people knew or understood that David Eby was going to change the governance of the province. People
so
thought this was aspirational.
So it almost seems like it was intended consequences.
Of course,
well, that's what I was going to say too, is like, there's that, I forget which interview it is, but it's quite a it's a well-known interview that it was a sit-down interview that he did, and he talks about fixing the colonial mistake. I don't know who was the interviewer, but it's recorded, like it's his words.
I saw it.
He talks about fixing the colonial mistake, and it's big on all the settler language, and I've said before, like, this whole thing of David Eby, he wants to do a mulligan. He wants to do a mulligan on 158 years of Canadian history and say, well, the Confederation is null and void or something. It's like, how can you do that? How can you do that?
You had said, like, I don't know, about behind the backs of people, and but really it's not necessarily misleading, but I do think it's the lies of omission.
Right.
Because if you look at what happened on the Sunshine Coast, for example, they had been asked over and over if they had an agreement in place with the Seychelles people, and they said no. And then after the election, what did they say?
Yeah, surprise.
Yes, they already had it in place before the election, but they didn't tell people.
And,
they said, oh, well, the government was going into, like, there's a period of time where you don't make announcements leading into an election. It was sort of a conservatorship, but that was complete baloney, being the nice word for it. But, there was been so many times this government could have told people, like, the reason they were going to make changes to the Land Act, you guys might remember a couple years ago, and they ended up having to pause that because the public found out they were going to be giving a veto power to First Nations. And look, to be clear, again, this doesn't erase Indigenous rights in the Constitution. And also, we do want to have good relations, and we want to have partnerships, and we want to do business in British Columbia. But I think that the damage that David Eby and the NDP have done by omitting information, by purposely keeping the public in the dark, hurts reconciliation. And it makes people resentful, especially when they see, I think a lot of people who own property in British Columbia see what's happened in Richmond. And, they're worried about life savings, like a lot of people have their life savings tied up in property. If it becomes suddenly that you can't sell it, or it's not, the value drops, what happens to your savings?
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Elenore, because there was just recently in the news a hotel that was supposed to be built. The developer from Ontario
pulled out.
Because of the uncertainty.
And one of the things too, another article that came out, I think it might have been Vaughn Palmer wrote a column in Vancouver Sun yesterday or this morning, and it was about David Eby saying, I was actually at his speech that he did, and he said, I will go to the wall for private property.
I was just going to say.
What word is missing? What word is missing from that statement? It's the word rights.
Right.
He didn't say, I will go to the wall for private property rights. He just says, I will go to the wall for private property, because he has no intention, in my opinion, of defending your private property rights. Yeah. But, he also then, in this news article that just came out, he says that the government will backstop these property owners so that they can access funding and stuff. But, how much British Columbia, but how much is this? We can't afford to do this over every square inch BC. Like, if every private property suddenly, like, think of the Lower Mainland and how many First Nations traditional territory overlaps in this area. Like, here in Surrey, we have like 3 at least, First Nations on who, this is the traditional territory that they claim. And so, I mean, how much would it cost to backstop every home in just Surrey?
Ooh.
Yeah. I mean, we couldn't afford it as a province. So these are things that you can't just say, well, don't worry about it, we're going to backstop it. Taxpayers can put together a little fund, because remember, governments don't have money.
Exactly.
It's your money.
It's all taxpayer. It's all taxpayer.
Government's got nothing. This is all the public's money. And governments are supposed to be spending it wisely and making decisions in the public interest of all of us, and not only select groups.
I'm one of the lucky ones that actually own my place. So I actually do pay property tax. I've been paying property tax on my place for 20 years now. So the idea that, I might not know if I actually own my place is crazy. And this whole thing of like, property tax is just going to dry up, and it's just crazy. But the other thing I wanted to get to is the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, Spencer Herbert. When Vaughn Palmer did an article and it mentions Spencer, he says, well, he kind of says, well, I don't know, or something like that, and so Vaughn Palmer comes out and is like, how does the Minister of Indigenous Affairs not know what the government's doing? But I mean, that tells you right there that the government is even hiding stuff from its own, top level ministers.
There's very little that happens that isn't coming directly out of the office of the Premier. And that's all fine and good, because many of these decisions that are now coming to bite us in the derriere, or that are having really complicated outcomes for the province, they all come from David Eby even before he was in the Premier's office. And so, I'll credit where credit is due, Premier Eby. And I think that we need to get back to the legislature as fast as possible and fix all this and figure it out and find a new path forward.
Exactly. I mean, it can be done within 1 day, maybe 3 days maximum. There's no reason why that the legislature can't be recalled for, up to maybe 3 days maximum and get it dealt with. I mean, why wait till February to have this brewing over?
The official opposition even had said that they would waive question period, waive the other business that we normally do. And I agree. Like, hey, look, if we're going to go back, I have private members legislation that you could call to repeal Section 8.1 of the Interpretation Act. Jordan Keeley, who's also independent, had introduced on the same day I did my legislation, he had a bill go in to repeal DRIPA. After the NDP voted it down, a couple of days later, I entered another set of legislation that is in draft, and it only repeals little parts of DRIPA, so you could still have DRIPA if they don't want to get rid of it, but it repeals all the parts that are the joint decision making, the consent decision making, and aligning our laws. Then we'll have some breathing space. Then we can have a reset. Then, because I think most British Columbians, like, I think, Neil, you brought it up, right, about people want reconciliation, and we don't want to have some sort of battle among non-Indigenous and Indigenous. That's not the path forward. But I think that we're getting to a point where people are frustrated, they feel afraid.
And Eby's the one that set the table. Eby's the one that set the table for the whole thing.
And rightfully so that people are afraid. I mean, and the uncertainty of not knowing. I mean, do I own my land? I mean, do I own my property, or I don't? I mean, all because of the interpretation that's been thrown in there, which should never have been done.
Well, and this is the thing, because if you go back, I don't know, only political nerds like me would probably do something like this. But when I first put my private member bill out, I put on my Twitter. So if you're a Twitter follower, go to my Twitter and check it out. I had put the video from the original debate of the Interpretation Act with Mike DeYoung, And
Oh, yeah.
after that, I had actually had a conversation with him to ask him, tell me about the debates on DRIPA. Tell me about the debate of the Interpretation Act. Why did you guys do this? Why did you vote in favor of it? Why, a lot of questions. And he had asked at the time on this Interpretation Act one, the very last question, he said, well, what happens tomorrow? What happens tomorrow when a decision maker has to make a decision? And the example we'll use is like a land title decision.
Okay.
But you know what happens before they ever answer that question? Before David Eby answers the question, the government had called closure on the bill.
Oh.
And they ended the debate. So these questions were being asked, and David Eby, as Attorney General, he didn't answer them.
Right.
And so, I mean, I don't think British Columbians ever got the full picture of what this meant. When they debated DRIPA, they were asked, Minister Fraser at the time was asked, Mike DeYoung had asked him at that time, and Mike pointed me to this to go and take a look at it. And I know Conservatives are playing some of these videos on their Twitter right now. You can go watch. And, he was asked several times, multiple times, does this lead to any new powers, any new rights for Indigenous people? No. But the reality is like now we're seeing joint decision making and veto powers are a power. It is a right. It is rights of refusal. And I think that British Columbians really didn't know that the way in which governance of the province would change. And something like this you would think would take a referendum. And
it really should,
the speed at which this was jammed down the throats of British Columbians, who just really, I think, most people want to do the right thing, and you think this is an aspirational document about working together and having conversations, not about changing every law in the province.
Exactly. Yeah, and I guess that's kind of where that bill, was it Bill 15, was it? Where it was just extraordinary powers just to kind of
and they just would bypass the legislature even,
without debate. Yeah.
For me, what was I going to say? We were talking about. Now I've got a. I hate that when I get a brain fart. It'll come to me in a second, Brent.
It comes down to just being open and honest, with the public and letting people know where things are at, but keeping things so secretive and behind closed doors. And it reminds me of a time, Eleanor, where the government had sent out, I think, what was it, in February of this year, they sent out a consultation or a consultant they want the government hired, and then of course they didn't. The NewsHour came out with it. All of a sudden, the public were like, "What is this?" And they were going to pay a guy, was it $150,000 or something, to go and consult on downtown Vancouver East Side.
And then he got fired.
Like what the heck, And then, of course, the blowback on that, and then say, oh, okay, I guess we made a mistake on that one. Well, you knew from February, but you didn't even tell the public. And then, so they were still determined that they wanted to spend that money. So they go and hire another person, a former mayor, and because, he knows the stuff, and he's going to go down there. Well, I can tell you, how about just reduce down poverty, get people housed, get them the services that they need, the help that they need. Close down the SROs, get them into a safe housing that is, going to be good for them. And
I wanted to circle back just briefly back to the Cowichan. I my brain fart is over, but
it happens.
Talk about the what's wrong with my brain? I'm having a disconnect. When you talk about, I don't know what's happening to my brain today, Brent. I'm doing all sorts of skipping today. The conspiracy. Like Eby's big on conspiracy theories, right? And but this whole he always stands up in the legislature. You always hear him talking about conspiracy and everybody's a racist, and he wants to do all this wedge politics and stuff, and I just don't think that's healthy. But at the same time, you realize that he's the one that's driving all of it. Like you kind of pointed to, Eleanor. It's like it's him that has engineered this whole thing. So it's either he's being incompetent as an incompetent lawyer, or it's purposely done where it's purposely engineered, right?
It's purposely engineered, and
yeah,
and, some of the advisors that are closest to Eby have, written op-eds and articles talking about upending the way that we have our society. And if you want true reconciliation, it takes great suffering. And this is an ideology. This is an agenda pushed by the premier. He feigns, surprise now, but he is the one that wrote that legislation, and it says must interpret our laws as being must do this. And so, you can't be surprised when the courts obey your law that you made. But he's often accuses other people of conspiracies when you say, look, you're misleading the public. Look, you didn't tell people that you had made a deal with people up in the Sunshine Coast. And then, this was actually brought up to him. I participated in a news story actually about it, and he called me a conspiracy theorist about it, which is fine, because, call me all the names that you want. My job is to raise awareness in the public. If we would have started that conversation last summer instead of, right now, maybe the outcome of the election would have been different, I can tell you. But, I think, some of the things that David Eby has been working on behind the backs of British Columbians really are an agenda that he has been working on for a long time. And look, it's really difficult. And I asked, my former colleague, Mike DeYoung, and I said, at the time, why did you guys not push back on the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, And he's like, well, why? And part of it is because if you would push back on these things, people would call you what?
Racist.
Racist, But, and it's gotten easier, and maybe, like I said earlier, the world has gotten a little less kind, or people's patience maybe is a little thinner, or maybe the world is just a little more open to having some of these conversations. But a couple of years ago, if you were to have a conversation like we're having now on the podcast, talking about altering, or not wanting to align our laws with Indigenous nations, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But I think that because we were so unable to have conversations that were difficult before, we actually messed ourselves up now.
I'm glad
we're at this place.
David Eby himself, by what he's done, he's damaged on both sides, though, right? He's damaged the credibility of the government, and he's damaged the credibility of the Indigenous nations as well. And
he harms them because it, sadly, people's resentment builds up, and it's not fair to the First Nations. It really isn't fair. This should have been much better thought out with more public consultation. One of the key principles of reconciliation is to get free, prior, and informed consent before moving ahead with activity on a traditional territory. But I would argue that that's something that you should have on both sides of reconciliation. It came to British Columbians understanding what the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and the Interpretation Act and these changes, what they meant. I don't think that David Eby had the free, prior, and informed consent of British Columbians to do that.
From what I'm hearing in Victoria, Eleanor, around my community, different neighbors, we talk about the podcast and great guests coming on. I said, Elenore Sturko is coming on talking about, a lot of great topics, and they're like, I'm going to tune in. This is great and very informative. But what I am hearing is things that are really bothering people in the community. They said if there was an election right now, unfortunately, nothing against the NDP, but what I'm hearing, people were not going to be voting for you this time around because of affordability crises, unsettledness about land, being renters. People are worried about, is the property owner really owning the property? Are they going to be evicted? Are they going to lose their homes? They can't afford to find another place to rent because the rents are so unaffordable. Just the affordability crises that are going on, and the carbon tax credit that was in place. Of course, that's federal, right? But they said the government could have replaced it for low-income people with some other kind of credit. And I said, well, the government's broke. The government's not broke. If they're broke, then they shouldn't be in government. They said it's mismanagement. So what I'm hearing is, as you can tell, a lot of resentment that people are just they're finding that the NDP is just not being truthful to and open and honest to the public of what's going on. one of my neighbors said, I mean, $11.2 billion deficit. They said, didn't the other former premier leave a $6 billion surplus? I go, he did. They say, well, then how can you turn it into a huge deficit and nothing to show for it? I go, actually, technically, that's 13.2 billion, but yeah, you know.
Well, you know what, Brent, we've come to the end of the show, and so I'm going to have my final comment. I'm big on metaphors, Eleanor, so I'm gonna throw a metaphor. Imagine if David Eby came to you and he said, Eleanor, can I borrow your car? And then he got drunk and he wrapped your car around a pole, like your car is totaled. You know, are you actually going to trust it? Like if he comes back and says, I can fix it. You know, I've got a toolbox at home. I can fix it. You know, are you really going to trust him to be the one to fix it? So like when he talks about now, he's talking about, you know, I'm going to fix DRIPA. Can we really trust that he's going to fix it? I don't know, right? I don't know.
And you're actually, my spouse says this to me all the time because we have these conversations, obviously, about DRIPA and my public position on it, and you know, you can't trust the one who built the problem to fix the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And we've seen that with countless things in this NDP government. This is a government that created some of the problems that we have with our drug crisis, our safety crisis. And can we count on them to fix it? I have very little confidence in that. They have created this problem with DRIPA through a lack of consultation, through aligning our laws in a way that is actually not compatible with the greater public interest. And I do not trust David Eby to fix this. You know, I'll eat this pin if he fixes it to a way that's satisfactory to members of the opposition like myself, you know, independent members and all members on our side, and even British Columbians. I think he'll be desperate to do something, but unless he goes the full distance with the Interpretation Act, it's not going to cut it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you know, there's the old saying that you can cry wolf so many times, and then eventually nobody believes you, right? Yeah. I remember my mom used to always say that. Well, you can cry wolf, but you know. It comes a point of time where you gotta face you know, the reality is that you know, making mistakes, but you gotta own up to your mistakes, right? And I think the rooster's gonna come home to roost very quickly.
It's been really great. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Oh, absolutely.
And, wonderful to see you both.
I was tickled. I was tickled that you came on. Tickled.
I'm so delighted to. When we met up at the legislature there.
My favorite restaurant. We'll have to have lunch there. We'll have to have lunch together.
Yeah. And when we joined back in the legislature in February, for the actual official session. Of course, then they need to come back in the session before then to get this mess cleaned up before. But look forward to in February, and maybe we can Sonia and myself can be your guests.
I would love it. Please do be my guest.
Yeah, get Teddy to reach out to Neil, and then we can get some tickets for the and arrange all that.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And well, thank you very much, Eleanor, for coming on, and I look forward to having you on again very soon in the new year, and we can talk about any other topics or continue where we left off on this topic to see where things are at that point of time.
Yeah. Merry Christmas as well.
I wish you guys happy holiday season.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas. Happy and healthy New Year for everybody out there.
Yeah, Merry Christmas and all the best seasons greetings and all the above to you and to your partner and to also everybody else watching today's podcast. Seasons greetings and
happy Hanukkah.
Stay tuned and happy Hanukkah and stay tuned for our next podcast. Okay. Thank you everyone for tuning in to PWD Allies podcast. Check out your favorite app where you find it best suited for you, and stay tuned for more broadcast coming up soon. And thank you very much to my guest Elenore Sturko for coming on, and have a great day, and we'll see you again in the new year. Take care.
Okay.